The first thing I do is sort my fabrics out and cut them into strips, iron them and then lay them out in colours so that I can see what I have. For all the lining pieces, I've already pressed the interface into the back side of the fabric. For the main front pieces, I'm going to sew scrappy bits of fabric over these. For the main outer back piece, I want to draw a 2¼ inch line up from the bottom edge. Now I need to find the centre of the remainder. So take the edge and fold in half against that drawn line and mark the centres. Draw a line through the centre and now fold it in the opposite direction to mark the centre in this direction and draw a line. Now I've got the centre of the back marked out, I'm going to ignore this bottom piece here and just work on this top section. I want to put a centre pattern and I'm going to use this piece of fabric. I want to fussy cut around the flower and turn it into a 5-sided shape. I'm going to flip it over onto the glue side. The glue side on this interfacing is shiny. Sometimes it's shiny, sometimes it's bobbly, depending on the interfacing. And I'm going to sew the rest of the fabric on over at the machine. I want to cover this interfacing, but I only want to cover up to this bottom line. I only want to sew where the fabric is underneath, along that seam, and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm just going to select random fabrics as I go along. Roll it over and give it a finger press. Lay your next fabric down right sides together and you want to make sure that you have a straight edge. And I'm going to stop about there because I want to cut this piece of fabric shorter. I'll trim that off. Finger press it open. Now I want to cut this shorter, like I said, so I'm just going to trim that up to that line. And keep working your way around the shape. If you don't want to do strips and you want more of a random look, you can take some smaller strips and join them together. I can sew that piece down at an angle and then trim off the excess. And then put that piece across there. You can iron as you go, which will help keep the fabric down, or you can just finger press and iron it down at a later time. And I've just gone past that line at the bottom. Here I'm adding a piece that I made separately and adding it all in one go, so it looks more like of a random scrappy look. And just keep on building up on your fabric, adding blocks or strips until you've got it all covered. Here I have 2 raw edges, so I'm going to have to do something different. I've made a separate block and I'm just going to fold over this edge here. And unpick the seam a little so that I can add it, so that I can get to the raw edge of this one. I want to line it up at the top along this seam here and make sure that I've got enough so that I can put it underneath this folded one. And I'm going to sew that down there without going over the folded fabric. Now I've added a scrappy block for this side, and what I can do is fold this folded edge over here and then I will top stitch that down. Give it a press down so that the fabric sticks to the glue and it will all be nice and flat. Keep adding and clipping the edges until you've got it all covered. Press it all down onto the adhesive. Flip it over and trim all the edges level with the interfacing. Along the bottom edge, I'm going to redraw that 2¼ inch line, and that's where I'm going to place my fabric strip for the bottom. I'm going to top stitch with some decorative stitches on my machine. I'm going to use a bright red thread so that it gives it a bit of a pop. When you're doing decorative stitches, make sure that you have the correct foot on your machine. It needs to be the foot that you can do zigzag stitches on. This is going to take some time, so I'm going to finish it and then show you afterwards. I've finished doing the machine embroidery over all the seams, and I also sewed around the flower in the middle, and that's what it looks like on the back. I'm going to press these down, trim them, and machine embroidery over the seams too. I've decorated the outside. I've done some stitch work and beading on this one, and also just the odd one on these shorter pieces. And now it's time to put it all together. If your vinyl is crinkly like mine and not very straight, cover it with a piece of fabric and apply some heat from your iron. You don't want to leave it on too long because you could damage the vinyl underneath. You need to be careful when moving the vinyl because you can stretch it. It's very soft. And now I can use the template to cut around. Now we're going to sew the long sides of the vinyl, which are the short sides of the fabric. So with the right sides of the fabric facing down, clip those onto the vinyl, flip it over and then line up the lining pieces, also right sides facing down, so that we're sandwiching the vinyl in between the two pieces of fabric. Sew those down using 1/4 inch seam allowance. Back stitch at both ends to secure the stitches. Finger press those down, and now we're going to top stitch, but I'm going to change my foot. I like to use this foot, which is a stitch in the ditch foot, and I like this because the straight edge here I run along the edge of my fabric, and it just gives me a nice neat edge to the stitches. I'm putting the guide along the folded edge of my fabric on the seam, and I'm putting my needle over to the far right and setting my stitch length at 3.0. And repeat for the other side. If you do decorative stitches, make sure you leave the seam allowance on either side, especially if you're using beads, because they will get in the way. I messed up on these side edges. I need to have added an extra 1/2 inch to the measurement on these side pieces. I've cut 1 inch strips of fabric and 3/4 inch wide strips of interfacing. I'm going to line the interfacing along the one edge of the fabric, and that will leave me 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to repeat that on all of the pieces of fabric. I'm going to sew all those down, the outer fabric to the outer and the lining to the lining. Now we're going to add the top and the bottom. Do exactly the same as we did for the sides. Make sure that you line up the top lining piece with the outer and the bottom lining piece with the outer. They are two different sizes. You shouldn't be able to see the fabric on the other side of the vinyl. You need 2 pieces of fabric, 18 inches long by 2 inches wide, and this is for the back side of your handle. And you also need interfacing that is 18 inches long and 1.5 inches wide, and we're going to scrappy fabric over the top of that. We also need interfacing for the fabric as well. Make sure that you interface both sides of your handle, the scrappy side and the fabric side. Draw a line down the centre of each strip on the wrong side. Now press all of the raw side edges into the centre and do this for all 4 strips. Now take one of each of the backing strip and the scrappy strip, and you want to lay them with the raw edges together, hidden in the middle, and clip them down so that there's an even gap on both sides of the scrappy strip. Now go and top stitch those down on both edges and repeat the same for the second pair. Add the handles. We're going to move the lining piece out of the way on the top edge and clip those down. We're only going to sew the handles on the main outer fabric. Mark the centre of the fabric. Measure down 1.5 inches from the top edge and place a mark 3 inches out on both sides of the centre mark. With the right side of your handle facing down, place the edge of the handle on the outside of that mark. Baste that down, and we're going to repeat the same for the back piece. Measure down 3/4 inch and draw a mark on both of the handles. Fold the handle up along that drawn mark and pin in place. Now measure up 1 inch from that folded edge and draw a mark, and this is going to be our sewing line. And now it's time to put it all together. First of all, we need to add the zip. The zipper needs to be 3/4 of an inch shorter than the width of your fabric. My bag measures 14.5 inches, so the zipper needs to be 13 3/4 inches long. Cut off the excess zipper tape after the tabs. To make the zipper tabs, with the wrong side of the fabric facing, fold in the two shorter ends together and give it a press. And now bring the two raw edges into the centre and give it a press, and fold it in half and give it a press. Put the zipper tab on the end of your zipper. You might want to sew the end of your zipper first if it's a bit awkward. Put the zipper tab on the end and clip that down, and then top stitch. Trim your zipper down to 3/4 of an inch shorter than the length of your fabric. That needs to be from end to end, including the zipper end tabs. Now put the zipper tab on the end exactly the same as we did before for the other end. Mark the centre of your zip. Draw a line 1/2 inch in from the edge on both sides. Fold over to that drawn line, which gives us a 1/4 inch fold, and give it a press, and do this for both sides. Here I'm adding 1/4 inch double-sided tape to the right side of the zipper, just to make it easier for me. It's removable until you iron it in place. You can also sew over it as well. Matching the centre marks, place it under the folded edge of the fabric. Make sure to leave enough space between the zipper tab and the fabric so that you can open the zipper without it getting caught. It is awkward because you're sandwiching the zipper in between the two pieces of fabric. Take your time and get it right to make sure that your zipper does open easily. Right now it's removable. Once I'm happy with the placement, I'll give it a press, and that will hold it a bit more securely. It's not permanent, you still have to sew it, but at least it holds it without it moving all over the place. It's much easier than pins. Checking my zipper to make sure it opens and closes easily, and now I'm going to top stitch that down in place. Repeat exactly the same for the back piece and the lining back piece. Now bring the main fabrics together, and we want to clip the outer front to the outer back to each other. Don't clip it to the back lining piece. Flip it over and repeat the same for the lining pieces, making sure that you don't clip them to the outer pieces. We don't want to clip all four pieces together. Make sure that your zipper is open at this point so that we can flip it through after it's sewn together. And sew that seam and that seam separately. Flip the whole thing inside out so that the lining fabric is on the outside and the main fabric is on the inside. Line up the side edges and clip in place. Make sure that the bottom piece lies flat and doesn't fold in. Sew down both of those side edges and make sure that your zip is open. Trim the edges down to about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now I'm going to go and zigzag these seams to finish them off. Now you could leave it flat like this, but I want to box off the corners. So squeeze the corners straight with that seam down the middle. And I want 2-inch corners. So I'm going to draw from one side to the other a 2-inch line. And sew along the line. Now cut off the corners, leaving 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Now flip the bag right side out. This is a Christmas quilt project that I have planned, and this is a whole layer cake, the book and the yardage that I'm putting in the bag. What a lovely way to carry your projects around on a project day or retreat or somewhere like that instead of carrying those big plastic boxes. Isn't it just so cute? I just absolutely love this project bag. If you're a paper crafter, this bag is also big enough to carry the 12-inch square craft papers and all of the bits and pieces that you need as well. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you do, please give me a thumbs up, like, share, subscribe, all of the above. I really do appreciate it. And hopefully I can continue making these videos for you. Thank you for watching. Until next time.